Hello, my name's Julia Honigsberger. I'm a consultant with Thorogood Associates, and on this video I'm going to look at natural language querying with Microsoft's Q&A technology. Microsoft's natural language querying is an interface into the Microsoft BI technologies that really doesn't need much training, and it helps users to answer questions in the way they'd ask them themselves, in proper sentences, rather than the more typical drag and drop style of many other tools. It's based on Microsoft's Power BI, which forms part of their Office 365 software. I'll talk a bit about what's involved in 365, and then I'll go straight into a demo. And for those of you who are interested in the software environment, I'll do a bit of a deeper dive into the technology supporting Power BI after the demo. As I said, Power BI forms part of Microsoft's Office 365 software. 365 is made up of a number of components, some of which are cloud-based, and some that are installed locally, but that operate under a service-based licensing model, not as software as a service. So the 365 Pro Plus tools that you're familiar with having on your desktop, things like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, they're installed locally and run locally on the user's computer as they are today. They're not a web-based version of Office, and users don't have to be connected to the internet at all times to use them. So it's a misconception that to use Office 365 you have to be connected. SharePoint Online, on the other hand, is a cloud-based version of SharePoint, and it's this version that enables Power BI. It's pretty feature-rich, although it does lack a few of the on-premise features such as SQL Server reporting services and performance point services, but the trade-off is that you get some new additional features such as Q&A that we're going to look at here. There are some other components to 365 such as Link for communication and Exchange for email, but these really aren't part of BI, and so I won't be covering them today. So the bits we're going to focus on specifically are Excel Power Pivot and Power BI and SharePoint Online. At this point I'm going to jump straight into a demo of Power BI, and in particular its natural language Q&A. So here I am in Office 365 SharePoint Online, and I'll do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the Power BI site. So within the site I have the opportunity to set up a number of folders to organise my information that makes the most sense to my business. I might put dashboards together, data connections, documents, mobile reports, things designed specifically to work on mobile, maybe iPhone devices, and a whole host of other reports. But to make life easy for users, I can set up feature reports. Those are reports that really are the most current, and they'll always bubble to the surface under my feature reports section. And on a personalised basis, I can set up favourites, and those will always come top of my list. So in this Power BI site, I've got a feature workbook that I've favourited, and it comes top of my list, and I could open that on the server and have a look at some of the visualizations that have been created, dashboards, graphics, different ways of interacting with the data. But I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to use Microsoft's Power BI Q&A capability, which you can see here top right. If I click on that, I get presented with a question panel, and at this point I can just start typing English. Now, for the purposes of today's demo, I'm going to take the role of a brand manager for the Ballerina brand, and I'm going to be working for Pressman's, which is a packaged goods company, and we operate in a number of sectors, so I want to find out a bit more about my brand sales. So there's my brand, and I just have to type the word, and instantly it's come back and told me which categories my brand operates in. And underneath what I've typed, I can see how Power BI Q&A is interpreting that. Show categories where brand is Ballerina. That's quite a stretch really from having just typed one piece of metadata. And at the end of this demo, I'll show you how that interpretation has occurred. But I'm going to carry on and ask a bit more about my sales volume. Okay, there's my sales volume. Maybe I want to look at it by month. That's the most typical thing I might want to do. And monthly data I like to see as a line chart. So I just type an English sentence and up comes my information. I've still got quite a lot of ways of interacting with this data in a more, if you like, traditional way. I could see it as a table, as a map, as a card, etc. But I asked for it in this particular query as a line chart. I can also start to understand and change the filters that have been set as part of my English language sentence. And I can even go to the fields within the metadata, just as I would within a pivot table, to understand what the metrics are called. And note there that actually the metric that I'm looking at is called sales vol. And again, it's interpreted my sales volume typing as sales vol. And we'll have a look later at how it's done that. Okay, let's ask another question. I'm asking for volume growth, so I need to give it a time frame, and at that point it can understand what I've said, and it's showing that in the categories that I operate in, I've had a pretty good year, certainly in 3 of those categories, although the body care category has seen a negative year-on-year volume growth. I can continue to ask questions by breaking it out by, say, country. And at that point, Power BI has recognised that this is a geospatial element to my data model, and it's showing it me in the most appropriate way that it can as a map. And I can continue to refine. And it's homed in on just the data I want. Increase that a bit, and I can start to see that actually if I look at Argentina and I interrogate that data through pop-ups, I've got a bit of a problem with facial care in Argentina. What I saw there was I've got a negative volume growth. Let's have a look at value. Value growth in that sector, in that category, is looking much more positive, over 18% year-on-year value growth. So what if I want to look at those 2 measures next to each other? Now at this point it's recognised that I've asked for 2 metrics, and the best way that it can think of to show me that is as a scatter plot. So that's really helpful to make sense of really the relationship between these 2 measures. And I can see that Argentina as a whole is doing well. We're seeing both volume and value growth. And here's that item that we saw when we interrogated the numbers separately. We've got a negative volume growth but a positive value growth. I might be quite happy with that. What I'm seeing is that I'm selling less but I'm getting more money for it. But it's something certainly that I can interrogate. Okay, let's ask another question. I'm going to look at the organisation as a whole, and in fact the whole market in which I operate. Sales volume and sales value. Oops, I mistyped that there. I'll have a look at that by category. Again, it's seen 2 measures, and so it's going to scatter plot it for me. And I might want to see the actual number of brands in each area. So this is where it's taken that 3rd metric, the number of brands, and it's included it as a size for each of those data points. So I can see that the laundry market is pretty large. We've got 56 brands operating, creating very strong sales volume and value. Similarly with vitamins, slightly less value but pretty strong growth, and I've got 70 brands in that sector. And I can carry on refining. I can start to see if the picture looks different in Brazil or maybe in China. One final question then. Let's have a look at our year-on-year volume growth and year-on-year value growth in 2013 by by category, and this time I'm going to put sales volume onto my chart to start really to get an understanding of where the opportunities and risks lie within my business. So I can see that anything up here in this top right hand quadrant has got both positive volume and value growth, and of all of those categories, laundry care is by far the largest market. Over here I've got items that have a positive value growth, so that's good, negative volume growth, so the numbers I'm selling are getting less but the money from it is increasing, so again I could be reasonably happy with that quadrant. But down here I've got an item cold and flu where I can see that I've got a positive volume. I'm selling more but I'm making less money out of it. I might be being squeezed on price by something like own label, and that could be an analysis that I want to go and do. So having used natural language query to interrogate the database, I might be really happy with that question and I might want to ask it again another day or save it for discussing with a colleague. What I can do is I can take that and I can add it as a feature question. There it is. I can do various things. I can change the background colour, I can change the picture, or I can even upload my own picture if there was something that I wanted to associate with this. If I then save that, it will appear here, and if I want it to, it can also appear under my featured area along with my featured reports. So that's a really useful way. Once I've found something interesting, I can just save it as a query. The next day when I come in, if I just want to run that, I can get back to the same answers. So how did Microsoft Q&A manage to interpret all of my questions? Some of it was reasonably straightforward. Sometimes when I made some typos, it corrected it for me. But there were some things that were really beyond what you'd expect something just to do as an interpretive tool without knowing any more. So let's have a look at how it did it. I'm going to move now over to an administrator tab, the Power BI Site Settings tab, and I'm going to optimize this Q&A workbook. When I do this, I get my question panel, but you notice that I also get a new panel appearing on the right, and it's going to give me some stats on how the book's been used, and I'm going to be able to use those stats to try and make the book understand more and more what users want to ask it. So I'm going to start off by clicking on this usage tab. Only one user, that's myself, and I've asked it 98 questions, and I can drill in and find out what those questions are. But what I can also do is I can look at unrecognised keywords. This is where somebody's typed something that the Q&A interpreter couldn't understand, and it tells me what they were, and I can see quite a few typos in there. There's SLES, which I suspect was an interpretation of sales. I've got a couple where I haven't put a space in, 2013 by and category and. But there's a few there that I think actually maybe people just didn't understand the data model behind this workbook. Period, for example. Let's have a look at when people were using that. Okay, I can see there's a couple of queries there, and I can see who asked them. So I might want to go and ask them what they intended to type, what they meant by their question. Actually, in this case, it's reasonably obvious. What they're asking for is by month, because that's what my model understands it by. Similarly, if I look at rival, a little bit less clear, but I can see the sentence and I can see the person who asked it. So in this case, I might well go and try and understand how they were trying to interrogate the data. But actually, I know that what they were trying to do was break out the data by competition. So now that I know that information, what can I do with it? Well, I can go into the synonyms area for Q&A, and I can start to tell it that when it sees those words again, to interpret it with the right synonym. So if I look at time, I can see here month from the data model. I could have typed month year or month, and I'm going to now say recognise the word period, and when somebody types that, uses it as a synonym for month. Similarly, that rival point, I can go in and I can see, I think, and I've talked to the user and I'm now happy that in fact they meant competition. So I'll type that in there. In fact, if I look at my metrics, I can see that in fact the metrics are even not what I was typing. If I go down to the bottom, I can see that I was typing YOY volume growth, but actually the real metric is called vol_YOY_growth. So quite a lot's been done already to make this much more user friendly. You may also remember that when I typed ballerina, it came up with a statement show category where brand is ballerina. That's quite a difference from my data model because category and brand are different dimensions. That was achieved through the phrasings area of optimizing the Power BI Q&A. And if I click on here, we can see that somebody has set up the phrasing brand is a subset of category. So it's saying although they're different dimensions, consider one as a subset of the other, and therefore it is the most logical thing to break the data out by. And you can do all sorts of things with phrasing. We can see here, if somebody types healthy brand, it will use anything that has a loyalty KPI of 0, or unhealthy brand has a loyalty KPI of 1. So you can get quite sophisticated in interpreting English phrasing. So if I save that now, and it takes a while for it to update all of the metadata around that document and all of the statistics, but it will come back in a minute and it will tell me that it's updated all of the metrics. There we go. I'm going to ask that question again. And this time I'm going to say by period. Oops, sales volume. And you can see that it's interpreted that as month, sales volume, where brand is ballerina. So a really useful way that this workbook can increasingly understand what users are asking simply by looking at its usage and using that to set up synonyms and phrasings. So that was a whistle-stop tour of Power BI Q&A. I'm going to end just by looking at how the architectural landscape might change under this scenario. So here's a traditional Microsoft BI landscape. We've got our SSIS, our integration services on the left, taking data from a number of sources into a database engine, SQL Server most likely, and then modelling that through a semantic layer, analysis services, or the new tabular model. And that can then be delivered to users either through reporting services surfaced on SharePoint, through analytics such as Pyramid or Tableau, or through Excel and the Power Pivot, Power Query, Power View, Power Map environment. And all of that is available within this setup and can be seen through SharePoint 2013 or even 2010. If we look at how that might look under 365, we've got our Power Query and Information Catalog interface taking data from our data sources. That could be our data warehouse, but it could be any other area. And then using Power Pivot to model that data, to mash it up, join it together, present it through hierarchies, etc. Power View, so that the users can present nice dashboards and cool ways of interacting with the data. Power Map for things like interactive geospatial journeys through the data. And that can then be loaded onto SharePoint Online and used, as we've just seen, through Q&A, through dashboards, through all different sorts of ways of looking at data. So that's our view on Microsoft Q&A. If you do have any questions or anything more you want to know about it, please do get in touch with Thorogood Associates and we'll try and help you. Thank you.